Okay, we're underway. This is the Affordable Housing Committee meeting of Wednesday, August 11th, 2021. We're meeting via Zoom. It's 7:03 p.m. This is Mark Barnhart, Director of Community Economic Development. We have with us this evening the Chairman of the Affordable Housing Committee, Steve Brathwaite. We also have committee members, Cindy Samarco, Carrie Mackover, Joanne Romano-Zonka, Heather Dabrowski. I believe our recording secretary is on the line, Gretchen Gerthner. We also have Herb Limecooler from the public, Serenity Bishop from the press, and our consultant, Glenn Chowder from Planometrics. And somebody else just joined. That must be Nancy. Nancy Lyons.
Hello. Hi, Nancy. Hi.
Okay.
Welcome.
Chairman, it's all yours.
Good evening, folks. And first, thank you for joining us. August is sometimes a month of people take vacations. I took a short one last week, and I'm taking a little bit longer one next week. Ordinarily, because we're on Zoom, I would say that only the members of the committee could ask questions, but we have a small attendance, and so if anybody else wants to ask a question, anybody who has a question, including committee members, should just raise their hand. You don't have to go in and raise the Zoom hand. You can just raise your regular hand. We don't have any guests other than Glenn, although Herb feels like he's a sort of a permanent guest for us, which is a good thing. Thank you, Herb. So with that, I would ask for a motion to accept the minutes from the July 20th meeting.
I make a motion to accept the minutes.
I'll second that.
Second was Carrie. Did you second it?
I did.
Yes, you did.
Thank you. Any comments, questions, corrections? Hearing none. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, raise your hand, say nay. And if there are any abstentions, please let us know. Hearing none, the minutes are accepted. Thank you, Gretchen. And so we'll turn it over to Glenn, our consultant on the plan update. Just one question before that, Glenn. Last month, you had given us a lot of information from the survey, and I think you had asked the committee members to read one particular part of it before this month's meeting. Am I correct in that? And are we going to discuss that tonight?
I think we certainly can discuss that, Steve. I think the open-ended questions were reported for the committee's review, just so that you were familiar with some of the concerns expressed in the survey responses. So I think we're not going to review those responses, I don't think one by one, but I think it provided, in my view, good information about how we can approach putting the report together to address some of the concerns expressed by participants in the survey. So we can talk about that if you'd like, or however you'd like to proceed.
No, if there's not a need, then we'll just proceed with how you want to present the information. And just before you do, I should have mentioned that I had to find a room with the best air conditioning tonight, and it happens to be the room with the cockatiel, and the cockatiel cannot go on mute, so I will. And I'll unmute myself when it's appropriate.
But wait, Stephen, are those tomatoes behind you?
They are.
They look wonderful.
But Nancy, he's not sharing with us, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, apparently they're all for the cockatiel.
Yeah.
I have a question though, since we're talking about that. Glenn, or for Mark, did we get any comments from the RTM members or anything that, I know it was sent out to various.
Yeah, I did share that. I shared the survey findings with the members of various boards, including the Board of Selectmen, RTM, Board of Finance, others, Planning and Zoning Commission. Generally, the comments were much appreciative in terms of our providing some feedback, but nothing more substantive than thank you for reaching out and sharing survey findings at this point.
And I think later on in the meeting, I hope we'll have a chance, Herb has done some fiscal analysis, so we might have a chance to kind of talk about some of the work that he's done and some of his findings. I think tonight, I provided 3 booklets for the committee to review. I think what I'd like to do is give you a high-level overview of these booklets, because I think it kind of sets a little bit of context for some of the recommendations and strategies that we're likely to consider as part of our work. So the first booklet, booklet number 4, is about the Plan of Conservation and Development. I'm sure, as most of you are aware, the Plan of Conservation and Development is an advisory document that guides the future vision of the community in terms of land use and development. So this booklet is to give an overview of what's in the current plan, and the Planning and Zoning Commission is in the process of reviewing and updating the plan. So we have the opportunity to provide input and feedback if we would choose to do so.
Hey, Glenn, would
Yep.
you be able to make these a little bigger?
Yeah, I will. I'm just going to give
Okay.
an overview now, Mark. And then-
Perfect.
and then
Okay,
make it
thank
bigger. Sorry. The next book that we're going to talk about tonight is an overview of the zoning regulations and some of the key provisions in it related to housing. The zoning regulations, is, again, I'm sure you're aware, are the rules that dictate what people can do and how it can be done. And there are some provisions in the zoning regulations that we should just be aware of. So it's an overview of the zoning regulations. And then the third booklet is an overview of what happened this past legislative session with Public Act 21-29 and some of the other bills that were proposed. And the purpose for that booklet is just to give you an overview that we're preparing this plan in a time of shifting legislative directives and other things, and just having that in mind, I think, can help us as we go forward. So again, my purpose here is to provide a high-level overview, and if there's any questions or comments, please raise your hand or pipe up, whatever you'd like to do. The first one is an overview of the Plan of Conservation and Development. I'm actually going to keep the page size this size for just a couple of pages here, because the first couple of pages overall are maps of Fairfield. I recognize in the printing of these maps that they got a little grainy. And if we decide to use any of these, we will make them better. But the purpose of these maps is to help the committee understand the overall organization and framework of Fairfield, because I think it's important for us to understand that as we talk about sort of housing strategies. The land use map clearly shows that we have these yellow on the map is residential lots and residential uses. And clearly here we can see in sort of the western half of the community, Greenfield Hills, and Southport, you tend to have larger lot residential areas. On the eastern side of town and southern side of town, we have smaller lot sizes and denser uses. And that has been the land use fabric or framework of Fairfield for some time. On the next page, we have the conservation map that shows us the location of some of the significant open spaces in town, the locations of some natural resource conservation areas. And I think those are important resources for us to be aware of as well. Map on page 4 shows us the location of affordable housing developments in the community, in-law apartments, and similar types of things. This is a map that was used by the planning department as part of their workshops on the Plan of Conservation and Development. And again, I realize Fairfield's a big town, but you're not going to get all the detail on this, but the colored sites that you can see here, the magenta, I guess we'll call that, is an indication of where we have in-law apartments. And the purple sites are affordable housing, and the purple outline is historic districts. We've also had prepared a map showing the census tracts in Fairfield, just really for an outline. And these little icons of houses that you can see on the map are affordable housing developments of different types and where those have been proposed in the community. Again, for the geographic distribution overall. This is a map from the economic development workshop done by planning staff, focusing in on some of the centers in Fairfield, villages and concentrations of business and other types of uses, and the train stations, et cetera. And then the map on page 7 shows us an area where water and sewer services, excuse me, exist in the community. That's this greener area on the eastern side of town. And again, on the western side of town, a lack of sewer, areas served by septic system. So this is the historic fabric of Fairfield, if you will. And it's the kind of framework that we're working within at the present time. But a plan of conservation and development is a reasonable place to talk about making changes as part of that. And that's why I wanted to provide an overview for you. I think probably a good size there. I think if you'd like it bigger, just let me know. The 2016 Plan of Conservation and Development contained a section which summarized overall housing goals for the community. There are 11 of them, and I have highlighted the language in green, which could be perceived as encouraging housing and housing opportunities. I've highlighted some text in red, which could be perceived as discouraging housing opportunities. And then the other text, which is black, is simply an overview or other recommendations related to housing. Some of these are related to the importance of neighborhoods, the possibility of developing in a cluster type of configuration, et cetera. So this is just to give you an overview of the types of strategies the plan recommends. And as part of our work, if we wish to, we can provide information to the commission to consider as part of the plan of conservation and development.
There's no blue text. Is there just no blue text at all?
Not on this page, there isn't,
Okay.
Carrie.
Okay.
And the only text I highlighted here on the top is that normally a plan of conservation and development might make specific goal statements and say, is our goal too? And the text here or the context is actually, we must seek goals that will
Yeah,
provide.
it's different. Yeah.
So it's perhaps not as focused or direct as the committee might want it to be.
So
The other thing,
I'm sorry, before you leave the page, or before you make your next comment, I just wanted to mention a couple of thoughts that if you looked at the maps, as you pointed out, the prior development and the zoning was focused more on the east or the southeast part of the town, and the big green and the big lots are in Greenfield Hill. And 70 years ago, you couldn't really build much up in Greenfield Hill other than single family homes because you needed the septic and you didn't have the sewers. Technology today would allow us to build up there if we wanted to, if there was really a desire. But it is still disconnected with the services that people need and that working families might need. But everybody has a car these days too. And so the idea that we must seek goals that might direct development away from Greenfield Hill, I think might be appropriate to look at more carefully, in my view. And then the second comment is on number 8 was current limitation on the maximum height of buildings. A good architect that I know said that actually some of the very best development is tall because it leaves much more land next to the building for open space, for recreation, for things that the residents and the neighborhood residents might like to see. I doubt if we're going to get any 10-story buildings in town, but Just a thought. So,
I think it came through, I think, too, in the survey, Steve, that design was an important consideration for people who participated in the survey. And so a statement which talks about limiting height and prevention of high rises may in fact curtail some options for good design. So this is feedback we may want to consider providing to the Planning and Zoning Commission. The next page, I think, leads to kind of an interesting discussion. In the 2016 plan, the Planning and Zoning Commission used a planning area approach, and they identified 11 areas of the community and then established recommendations, if you will, for each of these different areas. So these are somewhat similar to the neighborhoods that we identified as part of the survey, but some of these areas do have some differences within them. And I think that that is something I'm going to want to touch on again in a moment. On the next 2 pages, I have summarized the language for the neighborhoods, which reflects issues related to housing. So if there are statements in each of the neighborhoods that either encourages or discourages housing related things, these are here and consolidated for the committee's overall review. What I really wanted, I think, to focus on was the geography, if you will, of the POCD and its recommendations. I noticed text in the Plan of Conservation Development referred back to the 1979 Plan of Conservation and Development, and that plan recommended a centers approach. And the centers approach was based on 5 different types of centers. They called them town centers, area centers, neighborhood centers, regional centers, and historic centers. And that's what these circles represent. The blues are the town centers. The area centers are the oranges. The neighborhood centers are the purples. And then the regional center is Sport Hill up here, north end of town, the GE campus. And the historic centers are the kind of red circles here overall. But one of the things I wanted to talk with the committee about was whether or not these nodes or these centers might be useful areas for us to consider in terms of recommendations to planning and zoning on the POCD as areas in the community which already have concentrations of growth and activities in certain areas, certain centers, and whether or not this might provide a framework for housing recommendations to build and strengthen the character of the community. And it's a little bit more focused than the 11 planning areas and might identify elements of, structure or centers or nodes that might provide areas to build around in terms of housing related issues. Any thoughts on that, or would you like to move on to the zoning?
No, I like that thought a lot for several reasons, if I can talk, which I'm not sure I can, but
and I agree.
people are always saying, we want to walk, we want a neighborhood, we want to walk to the store around the corner, whatever. That's been big for a while. And this would enable some of that to happen on a small neighborhood scale. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
And I think we can talk about housing diversity and housing, smaller housing projects. There is this concept these days, which is called missing middle housing. That phrase is used because for the past several decades, development has tended to proceed as single family homes on one end of the spectrum, and the other end of the spectrum are larger multifamily developments of dozens or scores of units. And what's missing, and why they call it missing middle housing, are smaller 2, 3, 4 family cottage court developments and other things like that really can fit in and enhance a neighborhood. And they might be gentle ways to provide housing options and opportunities that strengthen each of these centers. I think as Carrie said, they make them walkable, mixed use, they could actually enhance values in the neighborhood, et cetera. So again, I wanted to share this with the committee, just for your thoughts or feedback as we move forward. This may be something else for us to talk about. If there's nothing else on the POCD, I'm ready to go to the next booklet.
Okay, let's do that.
So the next book is an overview of zoning provisions. Now, I'm a bit of a policy wonk on zoning related issues. Most of this information is really intended for the background information of the committee going forward. I think on the front, we have the zoning map of town, which is very similar to the other patterns that we have seen. It's only here as a starting point. It's not indicating that we're not necessarily going to make changes to zoning or recommend changes to zoning, but just really to provide context and information here for the committee. The comments that I have put together, just a second here. Oops. For the committee is organized around the section of the regulation. Certain points in here that I'd like to summarize for you, I will do so. One of the biggest things right now, I think, and we'll talk about this as part of the next booklet, is that this legislative session, a new public act was adopted, Public Act 21-29. And a number of those provisions are effective on October 1. And they're actually going to affect a number of sections of the zoning regulations. So I think there will be a number of examples over the next 6, 9, 12 months where there will be tweaks or changes to the zoning regulations. And I do think our report will eventually come at an opportune time. As you're probably aware, Section 2 includes the inclusionary zoning fee. It also contains a provision requiring a conceptual site plan for a text or map change related to affordable housing. Fairfield zoning categorization system has 7 residential districts. All of them allow for a single family. There's only one zoning district that allows for 2, 3, and 4 family. This is the C residence district. There are 4 small C locations in Fairfield. So while we allow certain types of multifamily development, the area where those uses could in fact be located in town is significantly smaller than a number of the other districts. In addition, there's a larger lot size required for those uses as well. The dimensional standards vary both in terms of building coverage, floor area ratio, and building height. So this affects the overall character of the community. There is also a provision of minimum floor area requirements in the regulations. And one of the things the legislature established as part of Public Act 21-29 is that as of October 1 of this year, these zoning regulations shall not regulate minimum floor area requirements. That's one of the changes in the act. We have a number of provisions related to accessory apartments. A number of these will be affected by this Public Act 21-29. And I think at some point in time.
Glenn, I'm sorry, Glenn, but there are some provisions I believe that the town can opt out of.
Correct. Good catch, Steve.
Yeah, and so if you could just note them as you go through, I'd appreciate it.
I will. So that's actually the first notation I wanted to make for you. It's up here in the sidebar on the top of page 3, which indicates that there are opt-out provisions related to the zoning regulations for accessory apartments. And this is an interesting one because a community can opt out, but it only has a year to do so. In other words, if a community has not opted out by January 1 of 2023, you are not permitted to opt out ever again in the future. So I do think that these regulations are things for the community to take a look at and decide how they would like to approach this particular issue.
Doesn't it require a 2/3 vote of both bodies that would have to vote on it to opt out?
I believe that is the case, Carrie. But I think there's some of the provisions in here in terms of, for example, there is no requirement for owner occupancy. You cannot require a familial relationship between the occupants. That's eliminated. So I think there are issues in here that Fairfield should, Planning and Zoning and the Affordable Housing Committee can and should look at if we want to weigh in on this issue about opting out or not.
Yeah, I think it would be important to develop a stand on this and to put something forward at some point, not tonight or not, anytime within the next couple of months, but I think whatever it is, it should be reflected in the report that we're going to eventually propose for adoption.
Yep. We skip over a couple of sections in the regulation, and then section 10 is the regulations for the design residence district. This is the primary tool for allowing or enabling multifamily developments. There are requirements for minimum parcel size and the maximum density in terms of the number of units per acre. And these can be somewhat limiting to multifamily development using the DRD tool. And so again, if we decided that we wanted to recommend a neighborhood-based approach, there might be another approach that we might want to consider or recommend besides just the DRD regulation. And there are some regulations in here in terms of location, design, dimensional standards, and some of the other incentives or opportunities which affect this district. And we can recommend again, to Planning and Zoning that these issues be looked at, or we can get more specific.
Glenn, the AAA and AA zoning, those are, and maybe Mark, those are all in Greenfield Hill?
Greenfield Hill is AAA.
Yeah, they tend to be areas that require large lots because they're on septic.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
If I just watch your eyes for,
services and stuff.
yep, bear with me for a second. I'm just going to go back a couple of pages. So this is again the zoning map, and I think the big picture here is this darker green color here is the AAA,
Right.
as you can see here in the legend. This lighter green is the AA, and it basically is parallel or adjacent to the AAA. So it's the northern portion of Southport and some other areas here.
Thank you.
Section 12 is regulations for the design business district. In these districts, residential uses can be allowed by special permit under certain conditions. And because the design business districts can be some of the zoning in the neighborhood areas, the centers that we talked about, this actually might provide an opportunity to enable some housing flexibility to address or areas adjacent to design business districts to promote housing development, et cetera. So I think in the business districts, we try to find a delicate balance between the business space, business uses, but that could also be an area which could accommodate some higher density residential if that's the direction we wanted to go. Section 13 are regulations for the Commerce Drive area. This is highlighted in the Plan of Conservation and Development as being an area to promote mixed-use development. There are provisions in here for transit-oriented development, requirement for affordable units and affordable units for the life of the development. Set aside percentage is 10%. And may want to discuss that as well. Similar provisions for the designed industrial district. Residential uses are not allowed in the design industrial district except for what they call the transportation commercial park. And this is areas adjacent, a minimum of 10 acres adjacent to a railroad station or platform. And there aren't many of those sites. So this is a kind of a special provision, if you will. There is a provision for special permits in the design districts, that any development of 10 or more housing units shall set aside not less than 10% of the units as below market rate units for a term of 40 years. So we do have a set aside requirement. I think one of the things that is perhaps important for us to talk about as part of this is that a 10% set aside requirement basically holds steady at the state's guideline of 10%. So some communities have gone with a higher percentage to try to play catch up to get them closer to 10%.
Glenn,
Yep.
do you know of any communities that have gone beyond 40 years for the term? Have they gone to perpetuity, 70 years?
I think it's something for us to talk about, Steve. So Darien has a regulation that says the life of the unit or 40 years, whichever is longer. I know that other communities are addressing this issue because they feel that it's a lot of work to get affordable units created, and then to have them disappear after 40 years is unfortunate. So how could we address that issue? And I think it's a sensitive issue in the balance between public and private interests in an 830G application. And I think it's something that should be considered or talked about. An 830G development and the state's affordable housing appeals list are based on the concept of a minimum of 40 years. So the doors.
Or anyone who goes over 40 years unless it's a nonprofit government assisted project.
I understand that developers would not appreciate going over 40 years, but I did an analysis where I looked at the present value of a unit 40 years from now. And we're not, it's 40 years is a long time for the, depreciation of a unit or its useful life, et cetera. So,
Yeah, Glenn, a comment on that, sorry to interrupt, but that I believe, my experience in New York City is that, they had plenty of developments that were 40 years affordable and then converted into condominiums or whatever. But I don't believe that there were any of the original developers still owned the property unless they were not-for-profit developers who then combined, did a joint venture with a for-profit after the 40 years. And so I'm skeptical when the developers say that 40 years is just too long, because they're going to be out of it before the 40 years passes.
Mhm.
So I think there are some issues related to this too, because at the end of 40 years is a financial windfall, perhaps, for whoever the last owner is. So for example, if it's a condominium unit, and at the end of 40 years, whoever owns that condominium unit bought it at a restricted price and is now able to sell it at market price, they could capture tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars in value just by being there at that time. So it would seem to me there might be an opportunity there to try to recapture some of that and reapply it into, affordable housing. If we're going to create a housing trust fund, as communities do, like Fairfield has done, to have that as a potential opportunity to get money into the fund. That what happens with that windfall at the end of 40 years? So these are things which are not in the regulations today, but could be in the future. I think the last thing I wanted to point out here in the zoning regulations was the definition of family. So this is an area where quite a bit of discussion has gone on in terms of if you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people living together, even the Golden Girls scenario, is that any different than a 4 or 5 person family living in the unit? So it might be an area again for consideration. I don't know of too many zoning enforcement decisions that go down on the family definition, but there was one in Hartford and they modified their regulations accordingly. The last couple of pages here in the book is I enlarged sections of the zoning map. So this is Northeast Fairfield and the different zoning districts. The thing I wanted to point out here is that the C districts maybe I think they're on the next page, if I may. C districts. There's 4 of them. Oh, here's one here. So the C district is 1, 2. I think there's a small one over here, 3 and 4. So in the overall scheme of Fairfield, in terms of zoning, it's almost all neighborhoods are multifamily except for these small areas. And perhaps, again, what we might think about is in some of the centers that we've talked about, or areas adjacent to some of these centers, that perhaps properties there might be converted to 2 or 3.
You meant single family, right, Clint?
I'm sorry, what did I say, Mark?
Multifamily, I think,
Oh, yeah, no, I'm sorry, I meant that. Thank you. All zones,
or single family with the exception.
correct.
Yeah.
So that's the zoning booklet. And again, this is to provide background information as our conversations start to proceed on the different types of strategies and things. Also based on the new Public Act, an area where more changes are going to be needed. As Steve indicated earlier, there are 2 opt-out sections in the Public Act. One of which, as we already mentioned, was the accessory apartment regulation. The other provision in the statute is the limitation on parking requirements for residential uses based on their bedroom size. And it does not allow a community to require more than a certain number of parking spaces for certain types of units. And again, I think we can sometimes see a situation that even a 1-bedroom apartment can have a couple in it with 2 cars. And that can create some challenges if it's not in a transit-oriented location. So I think it might be the type of thing for the town to look at a little bit more closely as to whether or not the state recommendations or requirements for parking work well in Fairfield.
And how do we fold this all into the timeline of both the dates where decisions have to be made and the POCD work and our work? How is all that going to happen and when?
I think, Carrie, my sense right now is that our next meeting, between now and our next meeting, Mark threatened that he was going to go on vacation, but he's not going to be gone on vacation for a whole month. I will be working with Mark and with staff to put together a targeted list of possible strategies for our further discussion.
Mm-hmm.
With the purpose, I think, of getting to either an executive summary or some other type of outline that we can now start to talk to other boards about. And that could include planning and zoning and others in the community to try to weave together for the Affordable Housing Committee to be at the table when some of these issues are discussed. So I think it's important for us to get a preliminary strategic framework in place and then start to share with other people. So as soon as we can, I guess is the best way to put that.
Glenn, thank you. I thought this was an excellent presentation. And at some point, we are going to have community participation, are we not? Zoom meetings. I was hoping we were going to have some in-person meetings, but they seem more unlikely now than last month. And so, Mark, can you help? Do we have anything on the calendar where we're going to invite the public?
Not definitive, but I think, it was always our understanding, even without the pandemic and restrictions on meeting in person, that July and August is not the ideal time to be doing a lot of community engagement and meaningful public participation. So I think we're in the data collection and analysis phase. So we're gathering a lot of information about the contextual framework that we find ourselves in. And now we're starting the real work involved in terms of developing some strategies that best fit the town. And that's where, some meaningful public participation will be important. So I think we were always identifying the fall as the best time to do that in light of, where we are in this process. And I still think that makes sense. I believe up until recently with the recent surge with this particular variant, we were anticipating come Labor Day being able to meet in person. There are part of what was holding things up is that there are some advantages to continuing to conduct in a virtual format, at least for some folks who may have difficulty participating in person, don't want to travel at night to a public meeting. Maybe they can dial in or participate in this fashion. So we wanted to keep the best of both worlds. And a part of that was a technological challenge for the town side, at least. I think my understanding is we've come up with a plan to allow for us to both meet in person, but also allow people to participate remotely if they want to do that. And we would do that at select meeting locations that have the technology in place to facilitate that type of meeting. So I think it is important that we talk about what that public participation element involves. In the last time we did this, we did a lot of we did some workshops where we had folks come and sit around a table and provide some discussion, feedback, some exercises that Glenn led folks through, but we also did some targeted road shows, if you will, that was more about providing some information to various neighborhood groups and other stakeholders to provide a lot of the background information that we just spent the last couple months going through, and then setting the stage for a discussion about strategies and actual plans. So I think still I think we're well situated to do that come fall, but we do need to think about, put together a plan as to what that looks like.
So my sense too, Steve, is that in response to Carrie's question, I think my hope would be that we would put together some strategies with preliminary directions, and would now give us the opportunity to talk to different boards, commissions in town, to talk to different neighborhood groups, to talk to the public at large, and get their thoughts and feedback on some of the strategies that we're considering to make them better and to bring them into the process. So going to the public without something for them to react to, I'm not sure is the best approach, but if we're able to sort of narrow down the strategies in September, that would open up October, November as the opportune times to do those types of things. So that would be my hope, and we'll see what happens with the COVID virus then.
Good. I would like to take a look at a calendar for our activities. September, October, November are good months, and I'd like for the committee to know what's going to be happening in those months in a more not totally granular level, but a more detailed level. December, I don't know if we lose December, much like July and August because of the holidays. The end date, Mark, we were hoping to have a rough draft. Was it February?
Yeah, I mean, I think that depending on how things go with our work and community feedback, we could use the December period to actually get to a crafted plan that reflects what we've heard at the meetings and use that time effectively. So come January or after New Year's, we'd be in a better position with the refined document to move forward. I think that would make sense to me.
I agree.
So Mark and I can work on a schedule. I think the last book that I wanted to go through and share with you tonight is the synopsis of the 2021 legislative proposals related to housing for two reasons. First of which is Public Act 21-29 contains quite a bit. So if you wanted to know what it contains, this will give you sort of a Reader's Digest version. It requires certain things that zoning regulations shall do, shall not do. It removes language which talked about preventing the overcrowding of land and undue concentration of population. It removes consideration of conserving the value of buildings as a zoning purpose. And it replaces the word character with reasonable consideration as to the physical site characteristics of the district. So these are some changes to the zoning text and framework that is going to probably take everybody a little while to adjust to. But you may find some of these provisions interesting overall. There are provisions that eliminate minimum floor area requirements, that address the issues related to accessory dwelling units. And again, communities can opt out of this provision with approval of the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Board of Selectmen. Provisions, again, talked about related to parking. I think there is, the legislature created a temporary commission to evaluate policies related to land use, conservation, housing, affordability, and infrastructure. And this committee is also going to be putting together a design book, which may actually provide an opportunity for Fairfield and other communities to have a state guidance document about design or a pattern book. I think Carrie shared a note here tonight about the missing middle housing. I haven't had a chance to look at that yet, but there might also be guidance for Fairfield to say, provided the development, falls into this general configuration, that's acceptable and that's, appropriate for Fairfield. So those are the main provisions that go there. I think the only other thing I wanted to point out here was the next page also. And this is the concept, I guess I would call it, of shifting sands here. This is quite an active session for housing related proposals. There were 12 other proposals that were recommended or suggested as possible bills that did not make it through to this public act. And so some of these, and here's the bill number up here at the top, if you want to go look and see what these are. It's quite possible that some of these will show up in next year's legislative session. I believe that one of the provisions, the one here at the top, addressing land within a certain radius of transit stations or commercial centers or main street corridors. I understand from Desegregate Connecticut, I think that they're laying out their legislative priorities for next year, and I think that's their #1 legislative priority for next year. So just things for us to keep in mind as we're moving forward, that these proposals may come back up and require some additional consideration in the future. Missing middle housing, some other provisions here as well. Any questions about legislative proposals or the synopsis?
Well, I think what's really interesting is that we do have a great opportunity to be very influential, and this requires a lot of careful thoughts. And Glenn, the way you put this together is really helpful. And but we have a lot of work to do in a very few months is what I'm coming up with.
I think we do, but Terry, the one thing I want to say to the committee is that I recognize that this sort of fundamental shift in zoning can appear overwhelming, perhaps to the Planning and Zoning Commission, or there's a lot of moving pieces going on and so on. So we do have the opportunity to assist and guide other people on this. Mm-hmm. But it's important too, I think, to keep in mind that the plan is meant to be a document which is going to be updated every 5 years.
Right.
So we don't have to have an affordable housing plan or a housing plan for Fairfield for all time. I think what we need to do is get a good, strong vision out there as has been done in Fairfield before, and then identify the things that we think we can tackle first and get that motion going.
Well,
and I think
yeah,
that'll make it a successful plan.
And we did that well with your help the last time with the 11 goals that we had at the end of the Affordable Housing Plan update. And that kind of a direction and path going forward would be helpful to all of us. Just a question, maybe it goes against some people's thought about supporting affordable housing, but there are 2 provisions that the town could opt out of. And in the spirit of local rule and local design and zoning standards, why wouldn't the town, and why wouldn't we encourage the town to opt out of those 2 and on their own opt back in or create their own language rather than have it given to us by the state.
Steve, a lot of our own language, is fine. I mean, there's not necessarily a conflict with what the state is proposing here. I mean, the act.
I understand that.
Yeah.
And I think that we would come to maybe a lot of the same conclusions.
Mhm.
It's just, I like
There's a
local
difference-
rules.
There's a difference between being 90% in alignment and 100%. So
Yeah, the parking is definitely.
if you don't-
consideration.
if you're not fully aligned with that and you want to preserve that option to chart your own path, you may need to opt out and at least to give yourself that option. And then opt back in, as Steve said, with regard to those majority of things, as you said, with the accessory dwelling units, where we're already consistent with where the state is going.
Or
Direction.
beyond.
Or beyond.
Yep.
But I don't know, Glenn, I don't know if you want to weigh in terms of Steve's question, why wouldn't we? Is there a particular, other than the fact that it would require a supermajority of two boards that would need to do that, right?
There is, and I think that, I think that supermajority concept is, the ramifications of that is useful to consider. I think there are provisions in each of those opt-out areas that probably require a community to ponder. So for example, in Fairfield, we're fortunate to have 3 train stations. Parking can be certainly an issue there, but we have areas nearby that are within walking distance. So would it make sense for the town to run the cars registered by address within, a quarter mile or half mile of a train station and say, you know what? Yeah, this is not going to be a problem, if you will, in terms of adopting a lower parking provision. I think the thing that many commissions, planning and zoning commissions are concerned about is you adopt a lower parking provision. Maybe you get more units on a site, but there's more cars and there's not enough space on the site for them. They start to spill out into the street. And that now starts to create problems in an environment where we can have winter storms. We're already fighting for parking in certain areas near the train station, and we should be using it for, other types of provisions. So to put a little science into that, I think could be useful for us to consider. I think even on the accessory apartment issue, I think most people have envisioned accessory dwelling units over the years to be a situation where a family lives in one of the units, or the owner lives in one of the units and rents out the other one. The state language says you do not have to be owner occupied. So it's not accessory to the owner of the property. It could be essentially state legislated 2-family dwellings townwide. And that's perhaps a scenario. I'm a big fan of accessory dwelling units, but I think it might be a situation that we might want to provide a little bit more guidance on that. Certain areas we might say that's fine, and other areas we might say no, it should be, at least one of the units should be owner occupied. So these are issues which are challenging to discuss and address. So I think how we participate in that conversation is important for us to figure out. Mr. Chairman, I don't have anything else to present to the committee tonight. Again, I did want to recognize Herb for his work in terms of the evaluation of the survey information. Herb put together a summary, if you will, of some of the key findings. I don't know if there's time now or at the end of the agenda to give Herb a couple of minutes to kind of give an overview of his findings, whatever you would like to do.
You can have my time because I don't have very much to say, so.
And so I would like Herb to have some time. Let me first ask a couple of questions for you, Glenn and Mark. Is it possible that we could have a planning session with planning and zoning? They don't have all that many planning sessions, but I think it would be really good if we could have a joint planning session with Glenn and planning and zoning.
Yes, I think that is something that we're looking to do. I'm not sure that we'll be able to do that in September. The Planning and Zoning Commission, my understanding is that staff is working with the Planning and Zoning Commission to have a planning session sometime in September. But there's a number of items that they need to discuss. Part of those are some of the things that were part of the legislative session this past year. So they need to start that discussion. But I do think that the commission and staff, planning and zoning staff, are in favor of having a joint planning meeting at some point.
Good. And Mark, I had asked you previously if Glenn was going to talk to any of the land use attorneys, maybe the local builders. Is that going to be part of our outreach?
I think if we got to the point where we're thinking about feasibility of certain strategies from a development standpoint, that kind of makes some sense. But I don't know if we're thinking back to how we structured this in 2014, it's a little different. So part of those conversations, part of the initial stakeholder conversations that preceded the actual planning process to begin with, it was the first step in kind of better understanding some of the key stakeholders, movers and shakers, if you will, as to how they perceived housing opportunities and challenges in Fairfield. So we didn't got to go through the same process this time because I think Glenn has greater familiarity with the community given his past work. But I do think it makes some sense, and maybe Glenn has something to offer as well. But if we get to the point where we're talking about specific strategies, we want to make sure that they're sensitive to market conditions and that people can actually do something with them. Then that wouldn't make sense to talk to builders and people in the trades.
I think I'd look forward to that too. I think we've made some real progress as part of the 2014 plan. The committee accomplished quite a lot in terms of the housing trust fund, the inclusionary fee, now providing the opportunity to move this forward. The discussion and visibility of this issue in the community has risen from where it was before. So I think certainly significant progress has been made. The statute that requires this plan now states that the plan shall identify how Fairfield will increase the number of affordable housing developments in the community. So our focus changes a little bit from kind of setting the stage for some of these approaches, which ended up in the 2014 plan, to a little bit more targeted approach now to reflect where we're at, what we've accomplished already in the community, but also what the statute requires. So I think I view this report as being a little bit more targeted, and I think it's probably useful for us to kind of get our heads together in terms of what we might recommend and then road test it. So I think we can use the survey as the overall sense of where the community is coming from, and now go back out to the community in some different groups and road test some of our ideas. And I think that's the way we can help make it the most effective plan.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So Mark, I would like Herb to have an opportunity to talk about his analysis and the pivots. Now might be the appropriate time, but do you want to talk about the Parkview Commons first, or should we ask Herb now?
No, I think it ties in nicely with our conversation on the affordable housing plan. So if Herb would like to do that, I don't want to put him on the spot, but if you're Herb, you would
Sure.
go over some of your findings, that'd be great. And then if you want to, you have the ability to screen share if you'd like. So if that's helpful or not, but I thought your work was very interesting, and I know Steve already shared your summary with the committee, but it would be great for you to go over some of your key findings.
All right, great. Sure, be happy to. If everyone has the summary, then I probably don't need to put it up on the screen. But if you don't have it, I can certainly easily put it up.
Why don't you throw it up there if you can.
Okay, sure. All right. So can I've got this open now in terms of screen sharing. Do I need to get that authority from?
You have permission.
Okay. Great.
There's a green button at the bottom, Herb, that should say share screen.
I'm going there right now. Glenn, let's see. Hang on a second. Let me just get out of this and I'll open it again. So got it. So share a screen.
It should
And
give you,
yeah, let me just pull this back up again. I think this is it. Hang on a second, Glenn.
While you're doing that, Herb, let me just say thank you for your work. I know you spend a fair amount of time on this, and it's very good analysis. Thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. And I apologize. I think some of the charts that I had initially sent didn't come through on this morning's update. So I'll go back and fix anything that needs to be fixed. But let me just say that the approach we talked briefly about it last time. So I took Glenn's data and then basically developed pivot tables from those, and that enabled me to drill down and slice and dice the data. So for instance, in terms of house burden, whether someone was house burdened, we knew that on an overall basis, I think 38% of the residents indicated that they were cost burdened, which meant that they're paying more than 30% of their income for housing and housing related features. So what I did was to try to drill down in terms of understanding better that issue. So who are cost burdened? Is it seniors? Is it people who are younger? Is it people who have lived in Fairfield for only 5 years or less, or longer term residents? Is it people in certain neighborhoods that are cost burdened? Is it people at lower incomes, much more so than people at higher incomes? So this is what I really tried to do, is to drill down and get below the overall one-way cuts to sort of do multiple cuts of the data. And it even allows the feature to go down and drill. And if I wanted to identify how many people are cost burdened that live in Fairfield Woods, and have lived in Fairfield Woods for less than 5 years, I can do that. So it's really a nice feature to be able to do. And so I developed this summary based upon doing that type of analysis for many of the features. There's some features I didn't really get to or address. I didn't, for instance, drill down into transit-oriented district interest, for instance. Can certainly find time to do that. But I try to hit some of the areas that I thought were really highlighted in Glenn's survey and summary. And so that's what really underlies this summary. So I'll try to be quick with this, but for older residents, so interest in terms of providing more housing for older residents, this is popular pretty much across the board, most notably among longer term residents and seniors or people that are age 55 plus. It was interesting to see that for people in the under 35, it was less interest and less interest for relatively new residents. So interesting observation. And we can do more analysis on that as well. This is just sort of some relatively high level work. Interest in terms of more housing for younger residents, pretty widespread, but interesting to see that certain neighborhoods, and especially the longer term residents in those neighborhoods, and I would highlight Lake Hills and Southport, not so interested in this at all. And there was also less interest by people who were, 10 to 14 year residents. Housing for lower income people. Notable support for this concept. I'm talking now about not service workers, but for lower income people and families. But there were some differences again by neighborhood. Certain neighborhoods were notably less inclined, certain neighborhoods much more enthusiastic about the prospect. So this is maybe something that, if the show goes on the road, is something we can really drill down and understand, what are some of the concerns, worries, issues that certain segments of our population have. Markedly less interest in lower income housing by residents of single family dwellings. Maybe we're not surprised at that, but because people want it to remain the way it's been, and they're happy with their lot in life, but markedly less interest for sure. And just drilling down more on single family dwelling residents and what they said about every issue might be something we could do. It might be worthwhile looking at. By household income, lower income residents, not surprisingly, much more supportive. I think some of the committee members will like this. Females showed much more support for housing lower income people and disabled residents than males did. Housing service workers, I was surprised at the broad support for this, largely across the board, but again with some reluctance on the part of certain neighborhoods, and certainly less interest on the part of single family homeowners in this issue. In terms of supporting the concept of having the housing authority, build more construction for lower income families and for senior disabled people. There's again, as we've said on the overall findings, there's more interest in terms of supporting senior and disabled than there is in lower income families generally. And some of the opposition again is neighborhood oriented. And there's more enthusiasm on the part of newer residents than there is on residents that have been in town for 10 to 20 years. I also provided some additional notes. I don't need to necessarily touch on all of these now, but my own early thoughts about what we might do with some of this information in terms of trying to drill down in smaller surveys or focus group discussions and whatnot. And I thought in each of these above areas, it's probably worthwhile to spend some time trying to do that in terms of understanding some of the reactions that we've seen. The cost burden, I referred to that before. This is pretty interesting. I mean, 38% of our residents say that they are cost burdened. And it's not surprising. I think these percentages vary by income level. And they also vary by age as well. But it's interesting, I think, that there is cost burden a part of quite a few people in town. And I think what might be happening is you've got people in, seniors and maybe more modest homes who are, feel the pinch. Maybe the biggest expenditure that they have is the property taxes, where a lot of people in newer residents, younger residents have bought properties at much higher amounts. They're probably mortgage poor, and they're cost burdened as well. So understanding that theme is something I think we really want to spend more time on and try to drill down into that. So some of the notes I have here relate to that and how we might possibly go about that. On the ADUs, the whole concept of allowing ADUs on smaller lots. This was mixed in terms of response. There's more reluctance opposed by by certain groups. Interestingly here, younger people and older residents, kind of, you know, the ends of the spectrum, we're especially supportive of this concept. But also a number of individuals express no opinion. It's a new concept to many of them, and they probably don't know how they feel. I would suspect that a lot of people may feel differently about this once they learn more about ADUs and where they might go, what limitations might exist in terms of where they can actually be built for various reasons. I think we'll probably see a change in this. And then most recently, I did an analysis of the renter population. They're really underrepresented substantially in the survey. Only about 10% of the survey respondents are renters. I think this merits a lot of study because this is where a lot of affordability issues lie, as I've laid out here. So 10% in the survey versus 18% of our overall population. So just a few still early thoughts, and be happy to drill down on any of these further that anyone's particularly interested in. And I'll try to keep working to update the numbers and keep everybody updated. Any thoughts anyone has, or can happy to take them now, or take them at your leisure. You can just write to me and let me know your thoughts.
Yeah,
Very interesting.
The pivot table, which we haven't gone through, has also some very good analysis. And on the cost burden aspect, it looked like the number of respondents from Greenfield Hill, like 25% of them were saying that they were cost burden. And so there's little nuggets of data, of information that we can gather by looking closely at what you put together. So thank you.
Absolutely. And again, Steve, we can drill down on that 25% in Greenfield Hill and find out more about that. You know, we can look at we can take a quick look at every one of those respondents and see what that profile looks like and learn more. So it's a good tool to have.
And Mark, I'm hoping that you're talking with Glenn to see maybe the committee could look at some of the stuff that Herb has done and help shape it in a way that can be helpful to Glenn, work that he wouldn't have to do himself, but we could present to him.
And I think I've had Herb, I want to thank you again for your eagerness and participation in doing all of this work. Herb taught me a couple of quick things about pivot tables, which I also really appreciate. I think due to some space constraints that we're going to have in the final report, I don't think it's in our best interest to create a mammoth document. I think light and focused is going to be the direction that works for us. But our ability to get there is enhanced by the work that Herb has done, because now we can actually pull out these anecdotes in terms of some of the particularly meaningful relationships that will help open people's eyes up to some of the housing situations in town. And so, Herb, again, thank you very, very much for your assistance with this. Very much.
Listen, really happy. We appreciate the opportunity to be involved and help a little bit. So thank you all again.
Thanks, sir.
Yep. Okay, Mark. Few comments.
Well, the reason why I was so delighted for Herb to share his findings is there's not a whole lot to report on the Parkview comment beyond that which I reported a couple weeks ago. So, you know, we just had a meeting not too long ago, and situation remains pretty much status quo. We have acquired 3 properties to date. One of our holdover tenants has moved out. Now we still have 2 other holdover tenants. One is under contract with a closing date in September, sometime, late September. And then we're in conversations with 2 other properties, but we haven't been in any rush to consummate those. There's interest on the part of both homeowners, but we're not really able to present those to the various boards for their quick review and approval until the fall anyway. So we've been kind of treading water a bit. The only other issue is we've continued to I'm working with Jim and Emmeline to refine our RFQ, RFI for a development partner for the site. And we hope to have that out sometime next month so that we can start the process of identifying a development partner with whom to work with on this project.
Thank you. And I had a related thought. I'm sure Glenn and a lot of people know about Columbus, Indiana. And when they do a municipal project, a church, even bank buildings, they get world famous architects to build or to design the building for them. We should try and look at that, Mark, and try to get some of the, well, in fact, we've got some of the best architects in the state. We've got one of the best architectural schools. We should set the bar a little bit higher on the design for projects that we can help control at the very start, much like Parkview Commons.
Okay. I'm not planning to develop this project. So at the end of the day, the person who's actually going to build it, I want them to have some skin in the game in terms of what they're building and whether it's cost effective to do so. So I agree. We might be able to find folks, as we have, to give us some preliminary designs. Duo Dickinson, I want to particularly recognize his contributions for doing a model and site plan to give us some design concepts to think about, design principles to bear in mind as we develop the project. So we could go through that process, but then if we turn it over to somebody that's actually going to go through the process of permitting and then hiring a contractor to build it, I want to make sure that they're able to build whatever we design. So it's important that those two pieces fit together at some point. Otherwise, again, I don't want to be developing this project because I have another full-time job to do. And that's really not what the town does, which is develop housing. We should stay in our lane to some degree.
Okay.
That's my counterpoint.
Let me toss out one other concept before we ask Carrie for a brief update on the ADU stuff. Most of Americans have the greatest share of their equity tied up in their home. And Fairfield County is one of the worst examples of economic integration that there is in the country. And if we do affordable housing, almost always the residents don't get an opportunity to share in the increase in value in the home. And that's, one of the issues down at Parkview Commons currently. I don't know how we do it, but it would be really nice if we could allow some of the families in these affordable housing projects to get a share, that this could be their own little 401k.
Well, I will push back a little bit on that because I think the evidence would show that actually they are seeing a return on their investment. It may not be what others in unrestricted housing that are totally market driven will realize, but the folks that have sold their houses generally have sold them for more than what they paid for them. And so to my mind, that is what you're talking about, but the trick is to do that in a way that is sustainably affordable for the long haul. Because the initial sale price in those units, partly because of the conditions that were imposed at the time the town acquired it, put the sale price higher than what perhaps some folks in this call would have liked. And when they go to turn around and sell them, they're selling them at a profit for themselves. They're making money based on their investment. But the next person or the other people next in line may not have the same opportunity because of, again, the change in income guidelines hasn't risen as fast as the underlying housing price formula that we put in place. So that to me is really tricky. We've even seen that on Nordstrom and Greenfield Street, the sweat equity housing. which were priced very low initially. And the folks there on resale have seen pretty significant gains, but it becomes less of a reality for those subsequent in the title. And that's a concern. So I think that's really where we have to, I haven't come up with or seen the perfect solution to it. We keep fiddling with the formula and how we structure these things. But that remains a little bit of an elusive goal to me.
I agree. It's a good concept, difficult to put in, to apply.
Maybe Glenn has some solutions for us.
Unmute yourself, Glenn.
Thank you, Carrie. It's always helpful for me to listen in on these conversations, though, because I can put together the information that you're sharing with things that I'm learning and hearing in other situations too.
Right.
And this is, as we're getting now into the strategies phase, that's where we all get to be a little creative and bring our ideas together and see what we can push forward with, and which ones of those are going to be the highest priorities. I think we don't want 50 or 100 recommendations. That's just not really going to work well. So I'll keep thinking about them.
Good, thank you. Carrie, I know that there's not a big update, but
No, there's not a big update at this point. We do need to set a date. We do need to come up with an outline of what it is we're going to do. And I'm hoping it's late September or October. You know, we're also running against, we didn't mention it, but one of the dates is going to be coming up is Election Day in November. So it's a lot of things to coordinate, and I hope to be doing that. Mark, when do you get back, Mark? When are you back? When Mark gets back.
I'm only taking a week off.
Okay, so not this coming week, but maybe the week after next
There
month.
you go.
We'll get together and talk. So,
Assuming they let me back into the country, we'll see.
yeah, if they let him back, right?
Mark, one of the things we should think about, or remember, is in September, there's a number of Jewish holidays.
Yeah.
But they don't really affect me, but we should keep that in mind as we do our planning.
Yep, good idea, good thought.
Okay, moratorium, trust fund, how we doing?
Yeah, it really isn't, again, even month to month, let alone something that, you know, when we had our special meeting a couple weeks back, there wasn't a major change from the month before. So these things don't change all that much from month to month, let alone in a couple weeks time. But in terms of the Housing Trust Fund, you know, we have an unrestricted fund balance, if you will, of $504,925, which if you look back last month, is like 1,400 hours more than what I reported last month. So it's not, well, a couple weeks ago. I shouldn't even say last month. It's like a few weeks back. So it's not a material difference. But again, most of the money there has been restricted for the purchase, acquisition of property at Parkview Commons to facilitate the redevelopment, cover the debt issue. So that's there. In terms of the moratorium tracker, again, the report that I provided at our meeting on July 20th is the last update in terms of projects, in terms of status. And there was an opportunity last evening for the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider and vote upon the application they had for Park Avenue. They did not, the chairman and vice chairman were not in attendance at last night's meeting. They did not choose to take that matter up. So I don't expect the decision until their next meeting at the earliest, obviously. And the project on Black Rock Turnpike on the former plant factory site is on appeal. The Merit Conservancy has filed an appeal of that approval. So, you know, like a lot of other projects, you know, they may get approved locally, but then somebody takes an appeal and we're in litigation for a protracted period of time. So that is, again, is not, there's been no change there. There was one new application that I added to the tracker at last month's July 20th meeting, which was on Beacon Square, 26 unit proposed development. And there's then no hearing date, but I'll keep everyone posted when that does get scheduled.
Do you have more information on that? 'Cause that's right up at Pine Tree, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah,
It
so
is
it's a
indeed.
very dense neighborhood
It's
already.
a very dense neighborhood. There are existing multifamily units there. They would be demolished to make way for this site, which is aggregating a couple parcels there. Their project is kind of perpendicular to the road, so it doesn't provide a large profile from the roadway, but it's a fairly dense development. 2 stories residential over a garage, so it's 3 stories. 2-bedroom units, primarily, I believe, all 2-bedroom, 2-bath units that are being proposed as an 830G. This is the same owner developer that did Bloomfield and or owns Bloomfield and another development up in that area, Beacon View, I believe.
So that's interesting. He must have been successful in his other 2 and feels that,
Yeah, those units are fully occupied and he's, to my knowledge, there haven't been any real issues. Those are smaller developments than this one. This is a little bigger than the ones he had previously built.
yeah, I went past the Bloomfield development last month. And in the past, I thought it stuck out too much. It wasn't quite right for the neighborhood, but this time as I drove through, it actually seemed to fit in better. Beacon Square, we just talked about. What about the that single family that's somebody wanted to maybe do a 2-family?
Yeah, so there's 2 projects that I'll mention that we're working with homeowners on. One is on Ridgely Avenue, mentioned last week. It's a dilapidated, vacant, single-family home, quite small. It's on an undersized lot, for a 2-family, but they'd like to do a 2-family duplex there. And the question was whether or not the committee would support that, a variance application to achieve that purpose, and whether we would support it financially. And my response was, well, to the extent to which, if we're looking at 2 units that would be deed restricted for a period of 40 years as affordable rental housing, we would definitely consider both of those. But we need to have more details in terms of what you're proposing. So the owner knows what she needs to do, and she saw me the other day and said, I will get you that application soon, but I haven't received it as of yet. So that work continues. In the meantime, another homeowner on Greenfield Street had approached the town to see whether or not we would be interested in selling off a piece of the park. And this is a portion of the park that kind of wraps around. It's mostly wooded. There are no park facilities there. It's open space, if you will. But it borders this gentleman's property, which is not where he lives at present. It's a rental property. And his idea was, if I can acquire a piece of property from the town, then I could build a 2-family. In any event, the conversation was such that, we're not really inclined to sell you a piece of town property so that you can build something for your own benefit, even if a portion of it were affordable. But we would be very interested in acquiring your property if you'd be interested in selling it. So we are in the process of getting appraisal done, and I will let you know what that price would be. But we've already had conversation with the Parks and Rec Department about the feasibility of using a portion of the wooded area, if you will, the open space to build affordable housing if we wanted to. Or if they wanted to come up with the money themselves, they could acquire this gentleman's property for open space as an extension of the park and a new entrance off of Greenfield Street. Though I don't know why we want to necessarily do that, but that's, I do think there's a possibility to create another 2-family unit similar to the ones we have down the street. But that's very early in the process.
Well, that sounds very interesting, and I like your approach. So I have nothing more. Well, no, I do. Going back to Glenn, what's our date in September for our meeting? And first of all, do we have to move it because of the Jewish holidays? And is it on the 8th or the 15th in September?
I have it on the 8th,
It
Steve.
should be on the 8th. Is
Yeah.
that a conflict?
I should know that, and I don't know that. It's
I thought we checked this before, but maybe. I
No,
missed-
it's not a conflict, I don't believe.
Yeah, I thought we usually run this against the religious holidays before we set the schedule, but maybe we missed it.
yeah. So is there something in particular that we want Glenn to do between now and the 8th? Or is it something that Glenn wants us to do between now and the 8th?
Hey, just a heads up, Rosh Hashanah ends on the 8th.
Okay, thank you, Heather.
So-
Yeah, I mean, I don't see it being a conflict, but I think that's probably what you were thinking.
Yeah,
Because it technically goes from the 6th to the 8th.
Yep.
But usually it's just the first night that's celebrated, but
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
there's definitely one thing that, and this would lead up to our meeting on the 8th, something that's been bothering me a little bit, as we know that the town's website leaves a little bit to be desired. We've been adding content on the Affordable Housing Committee page, but it's not very well organized, nor is it easy to find and navigate through the various systems. So when we engage Planometrics, we talked to Glenn about setting up a storyboard site and actually work with MetroCog, Regional Planning Agency, to do that. So there's one that exists, it's devoid of content at the moment. And so part of it is we have the framework there. We need to develop some content which provides kind of a story arc, a narrative to explain why we're doing this and why it's important, and what is affordable housing, kind of define some of those key terms. And then also provide a repository for people to access some of the documents that Glenn's put together and we've reviewed. So they have the same information we all have. So it's pretty easy for us to upload the documents, but then, the story component of it with some graphics or illustrations or pictures to be engaging is the piece that's missing. So for me, between now and our next meeting, I want to have that fully functional. And part of that's me working with Glenn to put that story together, and then getting the Regional Planning Agency to upload it to the site. But if there's other folks that want to be involved in that process, let me know. But that's on my to-do list, and it's been eating away at me. And it's partly I haven't gotten stuff to Glenn that he could kind of put some pictures and graphic illustrations around and give me some additional thought on it. But that's one thing that I think will help with our public engagement piece, because then we can always, when we meet with groups, refer people back to this where they can get more information and they can leave us feedback. But I'm also, to your point, Steve, I think, we've done a lot of data analysis or data gathering at this point, but now we're pivoting to developing strategies and doing that engagement piece. And, I don't know, Glenn, do you have thoughts as to where are we going? And I mean, that's where I see where we're at in the time frame, but
I think you're right. I think the next 6 to 8 weeks are kind of critical, if you will, for us. I think our work is going to become more visible as we get strategies together and start working with others. So I think that time frame works in terms of figuring out how we want that story arc to work, get it prepped up so that as we're talking with other people about strategies and they go to look for information, it's well organized for them. So I think you and I can work together on that. I guess I'd ask for your thoughts on the kind of skeletal framework of it, and then we can identify slots and how we're going to fill those as we move forward. And so I'm ready, willing, and able to help. And give it something to think about on vacation, Mark.
no, I'm planning to get you a skeletal framework before I leave on Friday.
Oh, really? You're breaking up on me, Mark.
Good. Thanks.
The other piece that's related to that, and again, it was a joint effort last time, but we were fortunate to have Glenn provide a lot of this background that we then incorporated into a PowerPoint presentation. Again, that formed the basis for our traveling roadshow. So we would go meet with a service club like the Rotary, or met with the Stratfield Village Neighborhood Association or Southport Village. We had a slide deck that we referred to that took people through the various data that we had assembled and then started to talk about strategies. So again, that's another piece. We have, I agree with Glenn, his comment before, we have to, when we're having a workshop or we're meeting with groups, we have to we're just not giving them a bunch of data. At some point, we have to present some ideas and get some feedback as to whether or not these are things that they think resonate or work well in the context, or they don't work well. But we need to have that, but we can start to put together the guts of that, now as we move ahead.
Good. So there's nothing else then that Glenn wants us to do, or we want Glenn to do between now and the 8th. No homework for us.
I think that Mark and I have some homework to do. I think my goal is to come back to you for the meeting in September with some strategies laid out under some different thematic areas, and hopefully organized in a way that the committee can start to now visualize how a lot of the things that we've talked about can start to come together, and then you get feedback from the committee. So I would say enjoy the remainder of your summer, and we'll see you in September.
Okay. Good.
Well, I can give you one. I mean, if you want to think about the groups, organizations, and stakeholders that we definitely need to meet with. I mean, we'll certainly meet with whoever, but we can start assembling a list right now of different groups and other, we have, and this is something the committee's talked about before, it's great to have these workshops and in-person meetings. They tend to be, at night on a weekday. That may not be conducive to everyone's schedule. And the format may not work for everyone. So again, subject to people's availability, because I don't think Glenn's not going to be necessarily available to do all this, and nor am I, but we can think of other means by which we can get the information out to folks and get their input in the process. So it could be like, I know Emmeline and others did a pop-up at the farmer's market. We can do something like that. Just we need to think along those lines too. So if you want some homework, you can think about groups we need to engage with, talk to, and, different mechanisms by which we can get people to participate in this process.
I like the idea of the pop-up. We need some materials. I
Yes.
don't think we necessarily need to be ready to have in-depth discussions, but if we had some materials that we could hand out, talk high level, and let them take home and think about.
Yeah, if you had a big board of some sort with some basic information on it, but also you had a QR code that would take somebody to a website where they can get more information.
Mhm.
Yep, I would do. You can have a list of questions, and you can even play a game if you wanted to. There's ways in which you can do this in a way that makes people think a little bit more about some of these issues.
Okay, well, let me ask Helene, Heather, Nancy, Cindy, Joanne, Carrie, does anybody have any final thoughts?
Lot to do.
Yeah, that's why I'm going on vacation.
Agreed.
Well, I think one group that should be involved is the Strategic Planning Committee. I kind of don't know where they're at right now, but I mean, I know who they are, or at least I know, who the leaders are, but I think we have to involve them besides planning and zoning.
And maybe at the same time.
Yeah, maybe at the same time.
Okay, well, make a list. Send us your comments. Okay. With that, we can adjourn
Okay.
and enjoy the remainder of August. Enjoy your vacation, Mark.
You too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Cindy, feel better.
Yes.
And enjoy your tomatoes, Steve.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm jealous.
All
Steve,
right,
you need to distribute those tomatoes. So
I'm going to distribute a few, but just in the neighborhood.
There you go.
Oh, boy.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks. Bye now.
Adjourned
Take
at
care.
8:45 p.m. Thank you all.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Bye.
I
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye now.